The Violins of Hope are a collection of instruments played by Jewish musicians in concentration camps during the Holocaust. Over the past 20 years, these instruments have been finding their way to Israeli luthiers Amnon and Avshalom Weinstein. The Weinsteins are masterfully restoring them and giving them back their voices. Today, these restored instruments are traveling all over the world telling stories of unimaginable suffering and injustice, but also resilience, survival, and hope, serving as memorials to those who were lost and testaments to those who survived. In 2018, the Nashville Symphony brought the Violins of Hope to Nashville to facilitate a citywide dialogue about music, art, social justice, and free expression. In doing so, we commissioned critically acclaimed composer Jonathan Leshnoff to write his fourth symphony, knowing that we would premiere the work and record it with Naxos, with our musicians playing the instruments.
A prevalent theme in my music of the past few years is Jewish spirituality and mysticism. I find these ideas and concepts so invigorating and fascinating. And because they're such spiritual concepts, they're so ethereal, to me music is the best conduit, is the best way to express them. The motivation, the inspiration behind this piece is an ancient mystical text called Hechalos. A Hechal is a room, it's a space. And this is a text at least 2,000 years old. It's a very peculiar text because the text is essentially a guide, a meditative guide for how an initiate would meditate themselves from one room to another until they get to some divine communion. I chose certain passages from this text. It's probably 40, 50 chapters. The initial chapters talk about the initial rooms that someone goes through, and they're quite frightening and scary. They move into a room where it says, fiery angels with 512 eyes stare at them, and each stare is like a sword. Really frightening stuff. And then the text proceeds until the latter chapters, where eventually there's this communion. And the initiate gets very scared, and some angel, some force says, it's going to be okay. And he walks into this room, and suddenly, just like a song overcoming someone, maybe we've all felt that you feel so happy, you just have to smile, you have to sing. That's what the text describes. And so the symphony is structured in two parts, not two movements, two parts, roughly 10 minutes each. The first part follows the initiate in the initial rooms. And the first movement's extremely scary, kinetic. It uses very dark sounds. It's unrelenting. It keeps moving and moving and growing and growing and growing. And indeed, the movement just kind of ends. It's developing and developing, and it just kind of ends on a very unsettled chord. That represents these fantastic images that Hechalos describes in the beginning. The second movement, however, is slow, lyrical, almost a love song between a human being and a higher force. It's with very minimal materials, but it grows and grows and suddenly grows until finally it climaxes into a huge uproar representing going back to the beginning, and then fades out back into nothing.
It is a German instrument that they suppose was made in 1890, and they thought it was owned by a wealthy klezmer musician. They think this person was wealthy because of how decorated it is. So you can see the mother of pearl on the binding area, and also the beautiful Star of David on the back, mother of pearl back here too.
For the Jewish people, any violin that was made by a German maker, they no longer wanted to play on the instruments because it was German. So they decided to get rid of them. They contacted Mr. Weinstein, and sold the German violins to him, and that's how this collection came to be.
The Violins of Hope seem to be the perfect mediator of this piece. You may how is that? Here's some ancient mystical text. What do the Violins of Hope have to do with it? So this is what I say. Here are instruments, physical things that have survived an incredible dark part of humanity. They have survived. Not only 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, but 5 million other people also perished. And here are these violins coming through with the survival. And that makes me think about what survival means. Judaism is something that's very close to my heart. And I began to think, what is it about Judaism that's survivable? I mean, these instruments survived, but there's got to be more to Judaism than just bagels and lox. There just has to be. So my answer to that, it's the spiritual tradition that has lasted for so long, and that's what survives. That's been going on for thousands of years in Jewish thought, Jewish study, Jewish practice. So I see the Violins of Hope as the physical embodiment of the survival of the Jewish people. And Hechalos representing this spiritual legacy, this spiritual heritage. I see that as a spiritual component. Both survive. And so I see my piece as putting the two together. The spiritual aspect and the physical aspect. The spiritual through the content of the work, and the physical through the Violins of Hope.